Hello and welcome to my presentation, Simple Tools for Advanced Renderings. My name is Chris Mowat. I'm a mechanical engineer, and I've been a SOLIDWORKS application engineer since 2014 in the Boston area. This is my 7th time presenting at SOLIDWORKS World / 3D Experience World, and I'm an expert in SOLIDWORKS Visualize. So I've been in the VAR channel for quite a while. I was a PhotoView 360 user initially. And as soon as SOLIDWORKS 2016 came out and we introduced SOLIDWORKS Visualize, I hopped on it right away and took it upon myself to become as foremost of an expert as possible. Well, in that journey, I found quite a few tips that really helped me as a novice develop advanced renderings very quickly. I've boiled it into 4 topics. So let's take a look. I'll first start by discussing custom appearances in SOLIDWORKS Visualize, how we can draw resources from online to build very custom and high quality appearances in Visualize. Then we'll take a look at HDRI environments, how to attain them, and how to apply them in Visualize to achieve a perfect lighting scene in your project. Then we'll take a look at importing 3D models to supplement your SOLIDWORKS models within the rendering. And finally, I'm going to show you some camera tips and tricks to overall boost the realism and give you that much more of an advanced look to your renderings. So let's get started with the discussion of custom appearances in SOLIDWORKS Visualize. One of the easiest ways to improve the overall quality of your rendering is to use high quality appearances. Now there are a bunch of appearances that are pre-installed with Visualize, and they are quite expansive. There's also a cloud library that you have right within Visualize to access even more of those. They are high quality on their own, but what if you need something that's outside of that realm? What if you need a very particular carbon fiber weave, or you need a very particular concrete appearance? We can go online and find these types of what we call textures to develop appearances inside Visualize. We're going to be looking at PBR textures. That stands for physically based rendering textures. They're developed by professional artists to most closely mimic the real life materials and how they react with light. So using one of these appearances from online will just immediately boost the realism. We're going to look at how to take these textures that we'll find online, apply them in Visualize to one of our appearances. We're going to adjust some of those appearances and then achieve the look we want. So let's take a look. I'm beginning here at polygon.com. It's usually my go-to for appearances that are built from those PBR textures. So I'll just go ahead and start by clicking on textures. Now we're thrown into the library full of appearances developed by professionals, and we can see that we can filter by category, and we can actually filter by the free appearances if you just want to get started. Now let's go ahead and choose an appearance like the rusted metal we see here. When you go ahead and click on that, we can see a preview. Now the preview is the first thing that I check out to see if it's something that I want. These are on the 3D objects, but this one right here is actually just the texture itself. So this is going to be the color of the metal when I apply it in Visualize. There's a few other things to consider with these PBR textures. We've got a workflow. There's specular and metalness. Metalness is usually best for objects that have metal in them, so a real appearance of metal. So we'll go ahead and choose that. Now the resolution is how clear that texture will be. The higher the resolution, the closer we can get before we lose any kind of fidelity and it starts to pixelate. So 3K is pretty good, probably a little more than we need in fact. But now we have to consider which textures we're bringing in, because there's a whole lot that are listed here. Now not all of them are designed to be used in Visualize. So what we're going to do is narrow this selection down to only the textures that we need for Visualize. I'll go ahead and click on Diffuse, which is going to represent the color. I'll go ahead and click on Metalness, which is going to give it that metal appearance, that really lifelike metal sheen. We'll go ahead and click on Normals. This is a high quality texture that gives the illusion of bumps and scrapes. And then we'll click on Roughness. This is going to allow us to nicely dial in very specifically how shiny this metal is. And then all we have to do is click Download. I've already got this one downloaded, so let's just switch over to Visualize. What we need to do next is create an appearance in Visualize, and then we can import the textures from Polygon to it. Then we'll apply it to the geometry we want. So first things first, we'll go ahead and create a new appearance. We do that by just clicking the plus sign on the Appearance tab and selecting New Appearance. Then what we do is we come over to the General tab. We can assign it a name. We'll go ahead and call this Rusted Metal. We can then change the appearance type. So we're using PBR textures. We're going to go all the way down and choose PBR material. This is going to unlock the ability to add the metallic roughness workflow that we chose in Polygon. We'll move over to the Texture tab, and this is where we can start importing those textures. Now, I'm going to start with color. You just double-click. These are the images that were downloaded from Polygon. The far left one was the diffuse, what we call map, that came from Polygon. This is going to be for the color. We'll hit Open. And now, Visualize understands that there are suitable images within that folder for the bump, metallic, and roughness map. Very convenient. I'll just hit Yes. Now, in order to see the results of what we've put together so far, we just need to apply it to a part. So I'll click and drag this onto my two parts. Now, right now, they're looking more like plaster, not metal. So we need to adjust some of the settings within these textures. One thing I'll do is disable the blend texture option for my textures. I went to Polygon to find a realistic material. I'm not interested in blending it with any other colors. Now I'll do the same for metallic, and this is where you'll really see a difference. And I'll do the same for roughness. So let's just experiment with each of these three brightnesses. There's a whole separate slider for each of them. I can increase or decrease the base color. You can increase or decrease the metallic property. So as I go to the right, it becomes a little more shiny, left more matte. So we'll keep it right around there. Then we'll choose roughness. Now roughness is, of course, going to adjust whether it gets that rough sheen or if it behaves more shiny. So if I increase this, it'll become more matte, and the other way, more reflective. Right? We'll keep it somewhere in that range. So there's one more setting that is very important when we're working with these, and that's the scale. So how big are these rust spots? Because on the bottom piece here, I've got a lot larger pieces of rust than I do on the top. Now that's due to the difference in their scale. So I'm just going to click on this other part here, and we're going to go over to texture mapping. Now texture mapping is going to allow me to scale all of these textures uniformly, and I can type in a smaller value to increase the grouping, make it tighter. We'll try 0.1, right? And we can see that growing. So we can even go smaller, 0.05, and that's starting to match. And now that metal buckle looks nice and worn the way that we were looking to make it look. So that's how we leverage the PBR materials within SOLIDWORKS Visualize, and how we brought those over from Polygon and made use of those professionally created appearances to use right within our Visualize projects. Having added some custom appearances to your model, you can see now that we've got some realism just from the high quality appearances. But let's take a look at one of the most important aspects of rendering, which is the lighting. You can put all the effort you want into appearances, but if you can't see them or represent them well with light, then that was a bit of a wasted effort. So we're going to take a look at HDRI environments. We'll start by heading online and finding a website that provides us with HDR environments. So there are HDR environments in Visualize. Now to be clear, an HDR environment is a high dynamic range image. It's a file type that's specifically designed as a 360-degree image with high quality color in it to produce all of the light accurately in your renderings. So again, Visualize does have a few of these available, but there are online resources, even free ones, that have high quality, beautiful HDRs that should fit your need for lighting. So what we'll do is we'll take a look at how we can import those to Visualize and then adjust some of their settings in order to make them our own and have them serve the purpose that we intend of making our scene look extra realistic. This website, HDRIhaven.com, is an absolute gem for free and high-quality HDRI environments that you can use right inside your Visualize projects. What we're after here is an HDRI environment that has trees and a forest environment for our mountain board. So we'll go ahead and use the nature filter here. The rest is up to you. Scroll through, try a few out. I'm interested in this one here. This looks like the one I'm after. You can see a nice preview of it. You can also see a preview of different textures and how they interact with that HDRI. Down at the bottom here, we have the option for which resolution we download. 4K is pretty middle of the road. I usually go with that, but 2K is also suitable. You'll know when you have to go below or above those. All you do to download is click on it, and it will download. With that downloaded, we can then go over to Visualize and add that environment right into our Visualize project. When working with HDR environments, we are most often going to find our way on the Scene tab. So this is where we can see an existing environment that's already been added. Let's go ahead and import the one that we downloaded. So if we click on the plus sign, that's one method of getting it. You can click here and hit New HDR Environment and go find it wherever you saved it. Or you could have saved it into one of the root library folders, like I have here. So I actually have my environments in my library, and I've created a subfolder with that new HDR that I downloaded. All we have to do is simply drag and drop it into our scene, and it completely changes the entire lighting scheme of the image. Now we can kind of look around and see it from different angles, right? Get nice up and close to it, and you can see how it just perfectly blends and matches the environment. Now you can adjust environment settings afterwards. Some of them would be useful, like change the environment to be just a solid color if you don't want to have a background. You can do that. You can also go further and increase or decrease its brightness. So I can just drag this slider and it will increase the brightness of that HDR. You can also rotate it. So this is going to change the direction that the light is hitting it from, right? And we can see those impacts. Let's get really just uptight on the logo here, and we'll see what this looks like as we rotate, right? You don't want to have too much of a gloss right over the logo. We'll just click, 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 and that looks pretty good. While the HDR environments go a long way to help with the realism of your model, there's another step that I've found to really boost it, and it has to do with adding context to your models. So we develop SOLIDWORKS models by themselves, but we don't always design all of the things that they might interact with. So in the case of this board, it will sit on a mountainside. This is where I have employed a strategy that I call using 3D models as props. Now we can leverage 3D models from online that are purchased, or you can 3D scan your own objects and bring those into Visualize in the form of mesh files. We can then apply appearances to them in the same way we do to our SOLIDWORKS files to get ultra-realistic results. And by doing this, we can incorporate real-life objects with our SOLIDWORKS designs to overall improve the photorealism. Now, what we'll do is review how to bring these 3D models into Visualize, how to stage them the way we want using a few different tools. And then we'll just take a look at a final camera angle and see if the work we've done was worth it. In my search for the perfect 3D model, I found myself back at Polygon.com. They've expanded upon their offerings in the last few years to include models, and HDRs for that matter. Now, I'm here today just because I found a great free one here. There are many websites beyond this. I've had great success with a few of them that I can name offhand, which would be turbosquid.com and cgtrader.com. Regardless of where you get it from, we need to be aware of a few things. It needs to be file format, friendly for Visualize. So let's take a look. I'll click right on this one here. It's a nice free one. What we see are 3D software options. I found that there's really no difference between choosing these. Visualize is not listed anyway. The renderer, I don't believe, matters either for our applications. we do need to consider the size of the texture. So this is the same thing when we use that metallic texture earlier. I'm going to choose 4K so that we can get nice and tight up on that texture without losing any quality. Then from here, we just go ahead and hit download. I've already gone ahead and downloaded this, so we can take a look right now over in Visualize how to bring this into our project that already has the mountain board. When looking to manage models in your Visualize projects, we need to be on the Models tab. And here we can see that we have one file currently in the project, and that's the mountain board. We want to bring in that rock model that we just downloaded, so we're going to come over to the Add button and click Import Model. Now, we have our model right here, and it's going to import as any other model would. It's going to ask us if we want to bring in appearances, cameras, anything like that. We'll go ahead and let it bring in what it thinks it can, and we'll hit OK. So the rock imports with a white appearance, and if we take a look, we'll come over to the Appearance tab. There aren't any textures either. So when we downloaded that model of the rock, it did come with PBR appearances. We can see them right here. So you've got a bump map, you've got a specular map, we've got gloss, and we've got a color map. Some of them are going to be extra and you may not use. But these are absolutely going to be applied to the model. So those are PBR appearances. What we're going to do is first change the appearance type of this model to be a PBR material. From there, I'm just going to make sure that I choose the corresponding workflow with the textures I have at hand, and that would be specular glossiness. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and import those textures. So the same process as we did earlier, we'll click on the correct one and hit Open. It's going to prompt you if it finds any of the other ones that are good for this workflow, and we'll hit Yes. And immediately, we get this rock formation with the correct texture. So the next steps of this process are pretty trivial. It includes moving the model around, scaling it up, copying and pasting it enough times for it to look like, an actual mountainside. I'm going to speed up that process for you right after I describe the tools that I'm going to use. We have what are called object manipulation tools, and they can be used at different levels. So to the left of that is the selection tool. I need to be on model mode in order to move and scale the model rather than the appearance, for instance. So let's start here. I click on a model and I can then move it up. Now it's most easy to do this when you are in preview mode because you're not constantly waiting for things to render. So what I'll do is just take this, move it up to about one of the tires, and then I'll copy paste it. You can do that really easily in Visualize with a Control D after you've selected the model. We can pull this forward, move it around to another angle, scale it up, which is this tool right here, scale, make it bigger. Alright, switch between that and our move tool, and then just pull this over until it's in the position you want. So I'll go ahead and fast forward this process, and I'll meet you in a second. And done. So now I have all of the rocks positioned in a way that makes it look like the mountain board is resting on top of it. I turn on the rendering mode and we can see the beautiful PBR textures and geometry coming from that imported rock model, and it just complements our model of the mountain board perfectly. Now you've seen how easy that was to just download 3D models online and incorporate them directly into our Visualize projects that have our SOLIDWORKS models in them. So in some of the other images you've seen on these slides, you saw a rider on that skateboard. It's the exact same thing. I went online, found a 3D scanned model of a person who was riding on a board, and I brought him into Visualize, staged him the same way that I did with the rocks, and you get the result that you see on this slide here. But having covered custom appearances, HDR environments for your lighting, and then the 3D models as props, one of the last steps in any rendering is positioning your camera and getting it exactly how you want for that final rendering. So now we're going to talk about some tips and tricks that I've picked up over the years to help boost your renderings and make them more advanced with a very little effort. There are 4 basic topics that I'll cover regarding Visualize cameras. So picking your target and setting your location. This is going to help with positioning the camera around a specific feature of your model. Then we're going to look at how to add perspective to the image to force a vanishing point like you have in artistic imagery. Then we'll take a look at adding depth of field, so that DSLR effect where you have an out-of-focus background. Finally, we'll wrap up with some filters and how to apply that extra little touch to send your renderings over the edge and get that photorealistic, advanced look that we're after. So let's take a look. Working with cameras in Visualize doesn't have to be a daunting task. In fact, the options for zooming, panning, and rotating are the exact same mouse buttons that you're used to in SOLIDWORKS. There are some other tips that I can give you, though, to make it easier for you to get the camera where you want it to be located. For instance, one of the big things that I dealt with when starting in Visualize was how to get the target of the camera pointed at a specific point on the model. And what I mean is, the ability to rotate about a certain area. If I am interested in an area on the back of this model, the rotation just doesn't lend to me focusing where I want. So that's where this tool comes in. It's right at the top, and it's under the camera tools. It's called Look At. So for instance, if I want to look at this logo and focus just on that, you go ahead and click on it. Make sure you turn off the tool afterwards, but once you do, now we can see that the rotation has been set where you want it. Now this isn't going to help you with the photorealism, but just trust me, you will avoid a lot of frustration by knowing this one setting. It will help you get the camera pointed at whatever you want. Now other options that are inside of the camera tools that will help with the photorealism would include perspective. So perspective is a general setting on every camera, and what perspective does is it allows you to add that forced perspective to the image. So you can do that via a slider here, or you can just hold the Alt key and scroll. So I'll just increase the perspective, and you'll see how that wheel gets dragged off into the background. Pretty cool. Now, an additional setting that you have access to improve the photorealism kind of goes hand in hand with perspective. It's called depth of field. So this is going to establish a point on the model that you want to have as the center of your focus, and then you'll have a focal distance to the back and front of it where things will then begin to blur out. So just turning on the option ends up making it all blurry, but that's because of the focal distance. It needs to be set. You can do it manually, or this is my preferred method. You click on Pick, and you select the area on the model that you want. So now what we're seeing is the model is clear and in focus right where I clicked, and then out of focus as it extends beyond that. I really like incorporating the depth of field with an environment showing in the background. We chose a great environment from HDRI Haven. Let's show it off. I'll click here for the background type and change it back to the environment. It just gives me a nice backdrop, and we can see some of that foliage. We can rotate the environment to get it to look exactly as we want. All right, we'll do that instead. Perfect. Look at that. Very little effort and a whole lot of improvement. We'll finish this off with a tool for cameras that is only available with the professional version, known as filters. We click on Enable Post-Processing, and what this does is it allows you to add color filters. I can add a complete layer of color on top of the image. I can darken up specific areas, lighten up other areas. We can desaturate or add extra saturation. I find that a little bit of desaturation boosts realism. You can overexpose it a little bit. I found that helps in terms of the photorealism. You can play around with gamma if you want, but generally I found that it sits pretty nicely at where it is by default. And then you've got the overall brightness of the image. You would adjust that as needed. Now, all of these tools you'd be able to find in Photoshop or some other software like it. But it gives you that opportunity to experiment with all of this before you've even rendered the image. Last thing I'll show is bloom. So bloom is going to add a halo effect around all of the bright areas in the scene. And it just gives you that extra little bit of realism that you would get from a real camera. The last step here is to then go ahead and just render this out. We'll make it a 1920 by 1080, and I'll render it out right now. Having learned just a few of these camera techniques is going to help you out greatly when you're in those final steps of rendering and just trying to frame the shot exactly the way you want. So we've gone through 4 different categories that will help boost your renderings and get them to more of an advanced level. Again, we talked about custom appearances, bringing in PBR materials from online resources, and then drawing them into Visualize to create beautiful appearances for our models. We looked at HDR environments, which we grabbed in the form of HDRI files online as well. We looked at how to import those and dial in their settings. I also showed where we can access 3D models that we can use to import to Visualize and complement our SOLIDWORKS models to add that extra level of realism as well. And again, we finished up with the camera angles and a few of the different tricks to get that perfect shot. Thank you very much for taking the time to sit through this presentation. It's an honor to be able to give this to you, even though we're not here in person together. Have a great evening, have a great day, and a great rest of your year. Take care.